Welcome to another Religion Media Centre Zoom briefing, and we're delighted to welcome today the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, who's here to talk about his book, Dear England, Finding Hope, Taking Heart and Changing the World. And how this is going to work is that I've got a few questions to start with, and then I'm going to bring in my colleagues, Tim Wyatt and Andrew Brown from the Religion Media Centre to ask a few more. But if you're on the call, please do put a question in the chat box if you want to join the conversation, and we'll come to you later in the call. So, Archbishop, thank you very much for joining us. I know you've done quite a few of these interviews already about your book, but it's very kind of you to make yourself available to us today. For those who've been following you in the last few weeks, I'm sure they may be familiar with the story, but in case people are not, could you tell us the story of the flat white at Paddington Station and how it came to be that you wrote this book in the first place?
Yes. Well, Ruth, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be with you. And obviously, I know about the work the Religion and Media Centre does, and it's brilliant what you're doing. So it's good to be here. So yes, a few years ago, I was the keynote speaker at the Church in Wales Symposium on Evangelism, and going down to Cardiff, got to Paddington Station, decided that the coffee from Cafe Nero was probably going to be nicer than the coffee from the trolley on the Virgin train. Not a controversial decision. Went to get my coffee. As you know, the way it is nowadays, you order your coffee and then the barista's making it. I'm standing there waiting for my coffee to arrive. A young woman standing next to me just looks me up and down and says, "What made you become a priest?" She initiated the conversation, and it became apparent very quickly that she was really, really serious. She wanted to know. And we got into this really interesting conversation. I basically said to her, there's two reasons. The first reason is God. I thought, let's not beat about the bush. Let's, God. But of course, as a Christian, it's God as God is shown to us, revealed to us in Jesus Christ. God, the human face of God. An idea which I think is central to the Christian faith is that God speaks to us in the language we understand. That is the language of another human life. So I said that, and I said the other thing is I want to change the world. That the world, this is not how the world is meant to be. That God in Jesus Christ shows us what humanity is supposed to look like. Gives us narratives which can shape the way we live. We got it. This is a conversation, not a monologue. But that's basically what I'm saying. She said some very interesting things to me, which I may come on to later. But basically, I had to catch my train. She had to catch hers. I'm sitting on the train, only 10 minutes later, thinking like you do in these situations, oh, if only I'd said that, or why didn't I say the other? And then realizing I didn't even know her name. And so the book kind of was born, really, that I thought, I think from that, straight away, she kind of represented to me what is amazingly still my experience, that thousands and thousands of people are very interested in the Christian faith. They're not members of the church, they're not believers, but they're not atheists either.
I was going to ask you
about so the book was. She became England in a way, and so the letter to her became a letter to everyone.
But now you're an archbishop. One assumes that most of the people you meet are involved in church life in some shape or form. How frequent are these occasions where you meet people totally outside the church, perhaps even
right now, pretty rare. But I'm a prisoner in Bishopthorpe Palace, and so I don't get to meet. I meet lots of people online, but actually, I think that these encounters happen much more frequently than perhaps people realise. My day job is speaking about what God has done in Jesus Christ and how it shapes the world. And I'm always looking for opportunities to do that on the fringes or outside the church altogether. So I've not been archbishop for that long, but I've been a bishop for quite a long while. And I would consider it to be a normal part of my working life to, for instance, visit sixth forms. I mean, I really enjoy, speaking to you lot is a challenge, but I can assure you speaking to a sixth form is much more frightening and their questions are much less diplomatic.
We'll have to
So
bring them in on the next one, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
For me, these encounters are fairly common, and also it is a common, not universal, of course, but it's a common experience that people are interested. They want, once they realise that you're not going to try to sell them anything, uh, uh, and once they realise that you can have a dialogue, people are very interested in. I mean, she initiated the conversation. What she really wanted to know is why would you live your life this way? Why would you be such an obvious follower of Jesus Christ? Help
I
me
think
understand that.
that was one of the things that struck me about the encounter and how you wrote about it afterwards. You said in one part of the book that you do want to convert people, and your language is quite evangelistic. You're on a mission for changing people's hearts. Do you come from an evangelical tradition?
Oh, no, well, no, not evangelical has different meanings, but it is a word that sometimes is used to describe a constituency within the church, and that is not the constituency that shaped. I mean, I wasn't brought up going to church, but my own journey as a follower of Christ is very much shaped by what you would call the Catholic tradition in the Church of England. But evangelical has another meaning, which is the proclamation of the good news of what God has done in Jesus Christ, and that is shared across the traditions.
You said yourself that you didn't have a kind of road to Damascus experience in your life. So when you say that you're trying to convert people, what is it that you're trying to convert them to become or to be?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I think I do indeed use the word convert in the book, though I think I also do qualify by saying I'm not trying to convert you in the sense of trying to persuade you to believe something. I don't think that's very helpful. I think I'm saying I'm trying to convert you in the sense that I want to share with you, particularly as you have initiated the conversation, but I want to share with you in as winsome and as compelling and as an intellectually coherent way as I can, why I would believe in God, which is not something which nowadays many people don't believe in God or don't know whether to believe in God or have never really heard about God. So I see it as invitational, that I'm inviting you to consider that this might be true, but in the end, I respect the holy ground of your personhood, and it's up to you to decide whether you're going to take any notice of this or not.
Just to ask you a few questions about the it in that sentence there, that it might be true, and this idea of God that you talk about and explain in your book. So you say that God is, it gets quite theological. You say that the source, God is the source of origin and everything that is, but God is not external and God is not within. So what do you mean exactly?
Well, the short answer is I encourage people to read the book, but that's a cheap way out. I think what I'm saying is that as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, I cannot say anything about God that is not shown me in Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ is, I don't even want to use the image of a lens, because that implies God is something other than Jesus Christ. But God was in Christ and is in Christ. And so
you don't mean God as a spirit that inhabits human beings or a force of nature?
No. I am a very, in that sense, a very traditional Orthodox, fairly conservative Christian believer. I believe that God is real. I do not believe God is an interesting set of ideas. When I say that God is the source and origin of everything, upon which everything is contingent, that is an entirely predictable and orthodox Christian way of describing God.
But to the lady who that you at the cafe at the coffee store where you got your flat whites, what would you say to her?
Well, the thing is, I think she did believe in God. I mean, that's what I find so interesting. Is why would she initiate this conversation at all? But that there was something inside her which was stirring, and really, what the book is about is not a book of theology in the sense that it's proofs for the existence of God. Rather, its starting point is, if you are one of those people who also has a stirring within you that God might be real, then come with me on this journey. And much of the argument of the book for belief in God very deliberately does not start with all the normal proofs for the existence of God, or even arguing from scripture about the existence of God. The book very deliberately starts with human experience, and it starts with human experience of delight, of wonder, of love, saying that, of course, there's many ways of understanding these things, but there's also a sense in which all the explanations, however compelling, kind of diminish our sense of wonder and delight in love, whereas the language of God expands it. So I use the image again in the book of going to the theatre or the cinema, where in order to enter into the play, you have to suspend your disbelief. So I invite the reader to, for a moment, suspend your disbelief. You know about delight and wonder, you know about love and joy, you know about all the very helpful explanations from science and social science about how to understand those things, and yet there is something else which stirs within you. Suspend your disbelief about God and enter with me into the Christian worldview that God is the source of these things, that they have been made real to us and available to us in Jesus Christ, and see where it leads you. So my invitation is to come on this journey, and the journey that we went on very briefly with that young woman at Paddington Station, and see where it takes you.
You say that God is love, and so God is an emotion, and you experience God, this emotion, when you're in community. Can you tell me a bit about that? Is it possible to experience love, God, on your own through meditation or?
Well, I think it probably is. First of all, I'm not sure love is an emotion. I mean, it's not an emotion, but I think it's something much deeper and more profound than that. Love is the thing for which I would be prepared to lay down my life. For those I love. And therefore, love is a deeply beautiful, deeply serious conviction about purpose and about what matters in life. It is expressed in emotions, I understand that, but I think emotion is not quite the right word. Sorry, what was the question? Oh, yes. Yes, I think these things can be encountered on their own, but I think one of the other ideas which I find compelling and helpful about the Christian narrative is, yes, we do believe that God is love, i.e. God is not, we're not describing the character of God. It's not that God is loving, God is love. But Christians also have this beautiful but slightly inexplicable idea, scandalous to people of other faiths often, that God is also community. So God is this community of giving and receiving. There is within God this reciprocity of love, which I suggest, again, not an original idea, that's the best way of understanding the whole of creation, that it is, as it were, the inevitable overflow of reciprocity of love, love is creative, it must be creative.
Right.
And therefore, we have emerged from within the creation of those who are also capable of consciousness and love in its highest form, which is the laying down your life kind of love. So you can discover that on your own, but it's much better to be discovered within community with others, because God is community and because human beings are made for community, because that's what being made in the image of God means.
Right, thank you. And I think that neatly leads us to Tim Wyatt, who's going to ask the next set of questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Archbishop. I wanted to ask a series of questions kind of moving away from some of the more theological aspects to looking at some of the ways in which you apply some of these thinking to kind of public life. And what was striking me when I was reading the book is that it seems to me almost quite profoundly nostalgic for a lot of things, for the post-war political consensus, for a pre-Brexit era, for a time when the Church of England actually counted in public life, for a whole series of values that kind of drifted out of public consciousness. Was that quite deliberate choice, or is that just an overwhelming of how you actually feel about the world?
Yeah. I mean, I would prefer not to use the word nostalgia, though I think I take the point that you're making. I think I would prefer to, if I, as it were, could write my own book review, I would use the word hopeful. Hopeful that the Christian narrative that has shaped the world in the past can shape it again. That we human beings need narratives of hope. And those narratives do help us shape who we are and what we do and how we use our resources. So yes, in recognizing that has happened in the past, I hope I'm also realistic about realizing it's going to be much, much harder in the current climate because the Christian faith does not have the same purchase on the human imagination that it did 70 or 80 years ago. But because the book is a book whose primary intent is to invite people to consider the Christian faith, then it seemed to me that one of the best ways of outworking that, in terms of the idea that, my two answers to the young woman at the station, God is real, and, why are you a priest? Because of God in Jesus Christ, and because I want to change the world. I felt one of the best ways of taking people on that journey of invitation to consider the Christian faith is to start to see if you follow this narrative, this is where it might lead you.
You say when you're kind of sketching some of these ideas out that the last time the church really made any significant contribution in this sense was kind of Archbishop William Temple in the immediate kind of post-war era, building up this idea of a political post-war consensus. Why is it that in the 60, 70 years, 80 years since then, the church has failed to make a dent in that? Is it because the church is no longer trying, or is England no longer listening?
Yeah, well, I don't think I'd use the language it has failed. I think I would stand by that was the last significant contribution, that I think, again, many people, outside of the church, I think would acknowledge that. But that doesn't mean to say it's failed since then. It just means that was the last, hugely significant contribution. I think there have been lots of ways in the intervening years where the church, and by the church here, I'm not just speaking about the Church of England, where the church has had a significant part to play in shaping public life. The obvious examples that spring to mind, which I don't use in the book because the book isn't meant to be it's not a history book. It's not a book which is analysing the impact of the church on society, but the Faith in the City report had a very significant impact on public policy in this country. I like to think that the recently launched Housing Commission, which is which I am involved in, but it is chiefly the work of Archbishop Justin, is already beginning to have a bit of an impact in that area. And there are lots of other, large and small examples of the church's influence in public life. So it's not that we failed, but do I believe that the Christian faith offers a narrative of hope for the world which can shape things as we move forward? Then yeah, the answer is definitely yes.
Picking up on one specific issue that you mentioned towards the end of the book, you talk about some of your hostility to nuclear weapons. You say that Trident is kind of morally problematic as well as eye-wateringly expensive. I wonder if you've seen the news today that the government is about to announce that it intends to increase its stockpile of nuclear weapons by about 40%. Any thoughts on that? Why is your side appears to be losing the argument when it comes to nuclear war?
Yes, well, call me old-fashioned. I'm no great fan of nuclear weapons. I mean, it shouldn't really be shock horror. And yes, I am aware of. I don't think the announcement has actually yet been made. I'm trying to have one eye on the news on that very item, and I do intend to say something later today, along with other faith leaders and Christian leaders on this subject. And you won't be surprised to hear it if the defence review does indeed, when we actually see it, I don't think it's quite officially out yet, if it is the case that we are increasing our nuclear capacity, I think there are some very serious questions to be asked about, the undertakings that we have made under the non-proliferation treaty of, is it 1976? I don't have the facts in front of me, but we are signatories to that treaty, and I think at the very least it asks questions about whether we're in breach of that. And yeah, I realise that this is an issue where, for a very long time in British society, all mainstream political parties have subscribed to what I think is the morally flawed belief in a nuclear deterrent. But I shall continue to argue that we should disarm, and I support those movements for disarmament across the world.
Why has the church so kind of singularly failed to win that argument, do you think? Why do you think politics, left and right, is so committed to the nuclear deterrent?
I've no idea, Tim. I've no idea. Because for me the argument is relatively straightforward. So I don't know. And when I nearly said I don't care. I mean, I do care. I care very passionately about this. But I think one thing which I'm sure you understand, and I hope other people on the call understand, I am not a politician. I'm not the leader of a political party. I'm not the chief executive of Church of England PLC. My job is to be a follower of Jesus Christ and an overseer of the Church of Jesus Christ. So my job is to teach and preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, and to see how it shapes what I would call a narrative of hope for the world. So I don't have to win an election and get votes. And I hope I will persuade people to see the folly of nuclear arms, the terrible danger it brings to the world. And I think this decision, if this is the decision our government has made today, then I think it makes our world more dangerous. It will mean other nations will want to arm themselves, and that's apart from the fact that it costs huge sums of money. Now, if you want there to be world peace, the very best thing to do is to increase your international aid budget. That's the best way of securing peace in the world. And I note that our country, sadly, tragically, has reduced that. And yet we have again found the money for nuclear weapons. For me, that is a cause of concern.
Just quickly then, before I hand over to Andrew, I wanted to touch on another thing that's really been in the public conversation over the last week. As I'm sure you're aware, I was really struck by a part of the book where you write about attitudes between men and women, and you say, in some parts of the world, women are still treated as the belongings of men. I wondered, what have you made of the kind of conversation sparked by the terrible killing of Sarah Everard? Do you think the church has a role to play in changing culture around male violence against women?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do, though I recognise that as a man, I'm perhaps right now not the best person to speak on this, because male violence is a real problem that we need to face as men, but as a society. But yes, I do think the church can take a lead on this, though on a lot of these matters, we must also be aware of our own troubled history and our own failings. But I don't think that prevents us from being able to offer a different kind of narrative. And again, you'll be aware, one of as the book develops, one of the big themes of the book is about human beings are made for community with God, made for community with each other, made for community with the earth itself. and that what we need to sustain the life of the earth and our own well-being is to build community, and that radical belonging to each other is the template, as it were, for God's way of inhabiting the earth, God's way of being human that's revealed in Christ. That does and must affect all our relationships with each other, including this one.
You make quite a lot of the idea of trying to replace the idea of the family with the idea of the household as a kind of broader, more inclusive kind of unit for understanding society, understanding our bonds with each other. Could you explain what changes when we switch family for household and how we act and live?
Yeah, well, again, my starting point is the revelation of God in Jesus Christ, and therefore the scriptures are what I turn to. And I've just found it very interesting in recent years that in many translations of the Bible, where in English you're reading the word family, it's translating a Greek word oikos, which doesn't really quite mean family, or certainly not family as we understand that word. It means household. And therefore, although I absolutely want to support family life as a basic and fundamental building block for our society, I also notice that the biblical witness has a richer and expanded understanding of what family means. And therefore, paradoxically, it might be our rather narrow vision of, the ideal family, the mum and the dad and the 2.2 kids, the family of all those kind of 1970s and 80s and possibly contemporary TV advertisements, that model family, that's actually not served us well, because it's not true to human experience. I mean, for many people, their experience of family has been horrendous. Family has been a place of damage and exploitation and abuse, which we have to acknowledge. But looking at it positively, I'm excited by the idea of family as household. That gathered together collection of people, which is maybe that is a really interesting model, both for the understanding the household of a nation, but also the actual households in which we live our lives.
Thank you. I think I'll hand over to my colleague Andrew, who's got a few more questions for you.
Thank you, Stephen. In general, it struck me that this is a book which is partly about England and partly about Christianity, and hardly at all about the institution which is meant to link the two of them, in which you're the sort of number two guy. Was this deliberate?
Well, yes, I think it was, but sometimes things are deliberate on a subconscious level, aren't they? And I think it's probably that. So it was certainly not intentional when I set out to write the book, but I did notice it myself when I got towards the end of the book and decided that I was not going to go back and correct it. Okay. So I think it's a very fair observation. I don't think it's a problem, because in a way, I hope that one of the things I will bring to the position I now have is that how can I put this? Because we're on the record, and that one thing I've already discovered, Andrew, as Archbishop, is because I'm the sort of person who thinks aloud, very often I'll say something which I don't really agree with, but I needed to say it to discover it, but it's already the headline. But I suppose what I'm struggling to articulate is I love the church and I love the Church of England, but I don't get up in the morning for the church or the Church of England. I think that's what it is, which isn't a lack of love or respect for it. And I long for us to change in many ways, but it's not my motivation. And I have a high doctrine of the church, and this is I'm quoting from memory something that Rowan Williams said. What is the church? Well, the church is that bunch of men and women who have been impacted by the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ and are working out what that means for themselves and the world. Now that's what I understand the church to be. Then we have this weird institution called the Church of England, which we have inherited and which I now have real responsibility within. But what I'm thinking about is, how can we better be that bunch of men and women who've been so impacted, blah, 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 so that we're learning to inhabit the world differently?
The problem, perhaps, is that you're talking about the attractiveness of the Christian experience, that people want to be close to God, that they have this very profound experience of the reality of God, the importance of Jesus. And somehow this is something which the Christian message, whatever that may be put, can no longer get across to people. It's completely deaf. People can, the church religion has become a toxic brand. How do you think that happened? How do you think this disconnect between what it feels like from the inside and what it looks like from the outside came about?
Well, first of all, I don't entirely share your diagnosis. I recognize what you're saying, but I wouldn't. My experience of it is not as stark as that.
It wouldn't be, because you live inside.
I understand that. And going back to an earlier question about my experience of going into schools, I'm very conscious that when I go into a sixth form, usually the first few questions are about what they would see as homophobia in the church, racism in the church, sexism in the church, and so I am actually very aware of how people on the outside see the church. And yet, those same people who see that clearly and want to discuss it are also very interested in the person of Jesus Christ, in the Christian narrative, in the idea of God, the spiritual but not religious children of 21st century, Europe. I think it's a European thing. So I see myself charged with two responsibilities as an archbishop. One is to help the church make the journey of confronting some of its failings in the past. I mean, another obvious one, would be our failings over safeguarding. We must confront those failings, and we must build a different kind of church. So on the one hand, my job is to do that. But on the other hand, my job is to keep on entering into those conversations with the culture and the world about the heart of the Christian faith as revealed in Jesus Christ, recognizing, another way of understanding the church, of course, is the church is just that network of communities of faith spread across the land. And at the local level, there are still so many examples and stories of the church doing astonishing things, and of people, despite their questions and the church's failings, engaging with the life of the church. So on all these things, I hope I'm realistic, but I'm also profoundly hopeful.
Well, a lot of the discussion in the last year has been about the particular difficulties of realizing this vision, and in particular, of course, the financial difficulties of the Church of England, where you've been rather, cast, at least in the right-wing press, as the grand villain, the man who's going to go through the Lord Beaching of the Christian Church. What I suppose I'm asking, because you've obviously denied this, and your point that there is no central organization is very hard to dispute. But how are you? I was, when you talked about making the church face up to its failures in the past, and safeguarding, you brought up, and I contrast this with an extract from a book by Quentin Letts in yesterday's Times, where he's saying that he's no longer a church warden, nothing to do with the Church of England for two reasons. And one of them is that he was made to attend a safeguarding course and was absolutely horrified by the suggestion that he or his congregation might be sinners. It comes as news to a great many Christians, obviously. But how are you going to get those people on side? Because you need their money, to put it as crudely as possible.
Yes, we do. And again, I hope I won't regret what I'm about to say, but because I do love the Church of England, and I long for us to flourish, and I think we will not flourish until we both face up to the mistakes of the past, and also center ourselves on Jesus Christ and the living out and sharing of the gospel story. But say the finances don't work out. Say it's. There's a really, really important sense in which, for me, nothing changes. And I realise that some people might find this hard to understand, but I believe God has called me to this role, and others within the church, and I will carry on doing my best to live out the Christian story and invite others to do the same, whatever the circumstances. Now, obviously, I hope that doesn't happen. But we do face financial challenges, but I don't think there's anything to be overly alarmed about. We are beginning to develop plans to work out how best to respond to that. We have historic resources which we might find we can use more effectively. I think we will find a way through this. Some of the reporting of this has been inaccurate and unnecessarily alarmist. But I'm probably not as worried as I should be. But the truth is, I'm not. Because what gets me up in the morning is the living and the sharing of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, but what we can write about are things like people shutting churches and dioceses being merged and so on and so forth. And I'm really struck by the clergy I talk to, and even some of the bishops, who are quite resigned to a lot of this happening. Perhaps they should be, perhaps it's the right thing. But there's a general perception that the Church of England as an institution is on the retreat.
Yes, perhaps there is, Andrew. But that is not, all I can say is that is not how I see it. That is not what we are planning for. Though I think there will be changes going forward, but at the moment we don't know what they will be because they are being worked out. And as you yourself thankfully acknowledged, most of these decisions belong in the diocese. So each diocese, well, in fact, each parish is an independent charity in its own right, but certainly each diocese is, and decisions about things which people are rightly concerned about, clergy numbers, church buildings, all things like this, are virtually all of these things are decided in each diocese. The church, however, centrally has got stuff to do, and we are trying very much to work together to discern how best we can support each other and use the historic resources we have to best enable the church to navigate its way through, what is a difficult time for every organization in the world at the moment.
Yeah, but what strikes me as the serious underlying problem is that you want to preserve the parish system. Obviously, you need to be the church for everybody. That's what the Church of England means. But all of the state churches that have been reasonably successful have been those that are funded one way or another by taxation. If you switch to the model where parishes have to fund themselves and only the financially viable ones persist, which I think is, I know that some of the evangelicals are thinking about this, and it seemed to me shadowed in some of the things that Justin Welby has been saying. It really is going to change the Catholicity, the universality, the sense of being a national church, an institution for everybody in England in ways that are not going to be possible to recover from.
Yes, well, I don't think that's going to happen, Andrew, because first of all, for a long time, though we're probably only talking, I don't know, 30, 40 years, which isn't that long for the church, but for a long time, by human perceptions, dioceses have been operating a model of share.
Yeah.
So some dioceses have much greater historic income than others, which is something I think we do need to address, the disparity between dioceses. So there's that historic income. Then there is the church commissioners' money, and then there is the giving of the parishes. Now, in most dioceses, or in a good many dioceses, the money from historic income is used to pay, the so-called central services of a diocese, absolutely necessary things which no organisation could survive without. And the parish share money is used to pay the clergy. Now, there's a clue in the title. It's a share system. So it's not that only the wealthy and those who can afford it get a minister. It is shared out. Now, the problem that we face is that the cost of paying for the clergy goes up. The money coming in stays the same. Any good household would soon reckon there's going to, there's a problem. We've got to look at this. But the ways of doing it that we are committed to is a way of doing it that will enable us to continue to be the church for everyone, not have a system where you only get a minister if you're able to pay for it.
Well, okay, but I've talked to at least one member of the Archbishop's Council who is really keen on switching over to the model where you only get a minister if you pay for it. His view is that parishes that don't pay for it will simply not get their minister replaced.
Yes, I'm not saying everybody agrees with me, but I am saying that's, I think I'm not pretending it's not a challenge for us. And on the one hand, we do need to encourage sacrificial giving from people to pay for the ministry of the church. We do need to do that, which is tough. But on the other hand, I think we need to hold out before people that big vision of saying we are the church for the whole of this nation. And therefore, if we're going to be able to serve the whole of this nation, we need to share resources with each other.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Yeah.
You've been going for 45 minutes, Archbishop. Thank you for that. We have other journalists on the call, and so there are some more questions that have come in for you. I wonder if I could ask Harry Farley from the BBC to ask his question, please.
Thank you, Ruth. Archbishop, I just wondered that you'll, on a matter of debate that's going on at the moment, which I'm sure you'll be aware of, around the government's delay on banning conversion therapy. I'm aware that you and the Church of England have spoken about this before. And I just wondered whether you could give us your view on that. And I suppose particularly the issue that seems to be the question at the moment in the government's delay is how you define it. And I wonder whether you think that conversion therapy, a ban on conversion therapy should go ahead, and whether that should include private prayer in religious settings.
So I do support a ban on conversion therapy, but I at the same time recognise that as with any piece of legislation, you do need to work as hard as you can to get your definitions right, which is never an easy thing to do, especially not in a situation like this. So I think that's probably all I can safely say on this at the moment. But I will use what influence I have to encourage the government to keep looking at this issue and to make progress on it, even though I do recognise it's, that side of defining what you actually mean is difficult. But I think as a matter of principle, I continue to support the banning of conversion therapy.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks, Harry, for your question. Moving to Malcolm Adcock. I don't know if you want to ask it yourself, Malcolm, in which case please unmute, otherwise I'll ask it on your behalf.
Thank you, Ruth. Yeah, Malcolm Adcock, Archbishop, really enjoying your discussion. With admittedly church attendance is significantly in decline, but it's arguable that spirituality is not on an individual basis. What can the church do to help people, I suppose, reconnect with their own innate spirituality?
Yeah, well, Malcolm, thank you, because that is what gets me out of bed in the morning. I mean, and you know, obviously that's what the book is written for, though, you know, I hope I'm not so naive as to realize it's a book, you know, don't get too excited. You know, there are those of us who love reading books, and I hope those people who love reading books may find this book helpful, but a lot of people don't find reading books helpful, and therefore we need to do other things. And actually, again, this is why I am hopeful for the Church of England. Yes, of course, we face big challenges in our institutional life. You know, surprise, surprise, it's been a horrendous year for our world, and we've been affected by it. But I'm confident that we'll find a way through, we'll make good decisions, and we'll use our resources wisely. There will be changes, but we'll get through this. What matters is why are we here at all, which is to help people to find God. And there's so many good news stories of churches that are doing this effectively, but at the moment, just not enough. So here where I serve now in the York Diocese, you know, the things I've experienced in the last couple of months of online communities of faith is simply astonishing. And there's been a kind of
I think he's frozen. The Archbishop is frozen for the moment.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened then. I think the Lord obviously wanted me to shut up. It's a direct act of God. I was obviously about to say something heretical. So God perhaps doesn't like the online communities like I thought he did. The online communities of faith, I mean, obviously I hope that people will meet in person. But actually, I'm not surprised by the fact that many churches have recorded an increase in their congregation online to the congregation they used to have in person. I mean, this morning, I visited a small group of rural churches in Yorkshire who meet online every day. And there were, I don't know, 40, 50 people on the call. 15 minutes every day they meet, and they pray together, and they meet together, and they share together. So we've discovered ways of building community online that are here to stay. The future, I think, will be a hybrid future. I think we've got a lot to learn about how we inhabit the digital landscape. I think the church has an important voice about the ethics of the digital world. But we will carry on with these online communities of faith. Yeah, Malcolm, there's so much I could say in answer to this question, but I think actually there's a huge amount of creativity at the local level, and there are lots of churches that are growing.
Yeah.
But yeah, not enough.
Thank you, Stephen. It's we can hear you, but we can't see you, which takes us back to the beginning of your book, I suppose, in a neat way. We've got just two more questions before we have to close. We're shutting this at 1 o'clock. So could I go to Catherine Pepinster for the next question, please?
Thank you. Archbishop Stephen, I noticed in an interview that you gave related to your new book, that you said that you couldn't be part of a church which didn't have a political voice. I wondered if you could say a bit more about what you meant by that. I don't know if you were referring in some ways to the House of Lords, so you're championing the continuation of the Church of England as an established church, or whether you meant something else. Perhaps you might mean a church which didn't have an ethical voice.
Yeah, Catherine, thank you. No, I wasn't. I wasn't particularly thinking of the House of Lords. I was thinking, very much about the Christian narrative, which is about how we inhabit this life, which therefore has ethical and moral dimensions, therefore leads us. So the Christian faith is about the whole of life. Therefore, it must be about that part of life which we call politics. And isn't politics about the whole of life as well? Also, I think as a believing in democracy. I mean, democracy, fundamental principle of democracy is that everyone has a say and everyone has a stake. So for all those reasons, I don't think the church should be party political. I try to, certainly on many issues, I usually succeed in alienating myself from most of the mainstream political parties. So for me, it's about the whole of life ethical dimension to Christian, well, not even dimension, that is the Christian faith. The Christian faith is about how we live our lives as God shows us in Jesus Christ. And therefore, it must involve us in the political life of our world.
And is a good way of doing that for the Church of England to be in the House of Lords? Do you think that it should remain there? Do you think other faiths should also be there?
I mean, this requires a longer answer than I've probably got time to give. I do believe in reform of the House of Lords, but I do not take the view that religious leaders shouldn't be there, nor that an unelected chamber lacks legitimacy. If you understand what the House of Lords is for, I think you can make a case for a House of Lords which is able to amend and scrutinise and is made up of many different people. So I think there is a place. There is a place for religious leaders within that, and whilst things stay as they are, which I think is very unlikely there's going to be much change in the near future, it's a privilege and an honour to be able to use my voice in the House of Lords to speak up for ethical matters and spiritual matters.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Archbishop. Well, I've got one parting shot, one final question for you before. Oh, you're back with us as well in person.
Am I? Oh, right. I don't know what happened. Yeah.
No, there we are. So this is the question. What's one thing about the Church of England that you would change overnight if you could?
Oh, goodness me. I need advance notice of questions like that. What's the one thing I would change overnight? I think I would. Is it too bland to say that we'd love each other? I think we'd disband all our silos. It's sometimes we're very tribal. Yeah, to believe in the very best intentions of each other in our discourse, I think would be good. I've got a whole long list of other things, but I think that would be the beginning of it. I think sometimes we don't listen to each other as well as we could.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for putting yourself through an hour of questioning from all of us. I'm sure I speak for everyone, it was illuminating, and we're very glad indeed that you joined our call today. So thank you. I hope you'll come back and join us again.
Yeah, it's been great being with you, and I've already thought I want to change my final answer. I think actually it's to be a church for the poor, actually. The more, I've become very aware of the great discrepancies of wealth and opportunity in our nation, moving back north. And the question earlier about, will we just become a church for those who can afford it? I really, really, really hope on my watch that won't happen. So actually, yes, a bias to the poor probably is the thing I'd like to not so much change, but really, really underline. But thank you. It's been great to be with you. You were almost as tricky as the last sixth form I was interviewed by.
Good. Thank you very much indeed again, and look forward to having you back in the not too distant future. Thanks again, Archbishop.
Thank you.
Bye everyone, stay safe.